The morning was cold, though sunlight streamed weakly through the lace curtains of my small kitchen. I had always loved mornings. The smell of freshly brewed coffee, the quiet hum of the world waking up. But that particular morning felt different. It carried a heaviness that even the warmth of my cup couldn't chase away. The suitcase beside the table looked far too small to hold the pieces of a lifetime. Yet somehow everything I owned now fit inside it. Daniel was late. He had promised he'd come by 9, but when the clock ticked to 10, I knew he was stalling. He always hated confrontation. Ever since he was little, he avoided conflict, preferring to disappear behind polite smiles and silence. When he finally knocked, it wasn't a son's gentle tap. It was short, brisk, businesslike. I knew, in that instant, that this wasn't just a ride. It was a goodbye. He stepped in, eyes darting around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. Or maybe like he was trying not to. "Hey, Mom," he muttered, setting his phone on the counter. "You ready?" Ready. The word almost made me laugh. How does one prepare to be discarded? "Yes, dear," I said softly, wrapping my shawl tighter around my shoulders. I wanted to look strong, composed, the way a mother should, even as my heart trembled beneath my ribs. He glanced at the suitcase and frowned, perhaps surprised I had so little to bring. But what was the point of carrying memories to a place where they meant nothing? He picked up the suitcase and walked toward the door, not noticing how I paused by the old family photos on the wall. There was Daniel at age 5, face smeared with birthday cake. Daniel in his high school graduation gown. Daniel on his wedding day, standing tall and proud while I watched from the front row, tears glistening in my eyes. I touched the frame gently before following him out. The drive was quiet. The silence between us wasn't new. It had been growing for years, stretching like an invisible thread ready to snap. He made small talk, mostly about work, about how busy things were, about how this arrangement would be best for me. He didn't look at me while speaking, eyes fixed on the road. "I just think you'll be more comfortable there," he said finally. "They have nurses on call, social activities, proper meals. You'll have people your age to talk to." I turned to face him. "And what about you, Daniel? Who will I talk to when I need my son?" He shifted in his seat. "You'll still see me, Mom. I'll visit every week. It's just things are hectic right now. You know how it is with work and—" I stopped listening. I had heard this speech before, in pieces, scattered over months of postponed dinners and missed calls. I had felt it coming the way one feels an approaching storm. Subtle, undeniable, inevitable. The nursing home came into view sooner than I expected. A sprawling beige building surrounded by trimmed hedges, and a parking lot full of visitors' cars. It looked clean, pleasant even, but I could already sense the emptiness that lived behind its polished windows. The kind of emptiness that smiled politely but never truly saw you. Daniel parked and hurried out to fetch my suitcase. I followed slowly, my legs trembling slightly, whether from age or dread I couldn't tell. A woman in a mint green uniform greeted us at the entrance. "Welcome to Willowhaven," she said with a practiced smile. "You must be Mrs. Carter. We've been expecting you." "They're expecting me." The words stung, as if I had been scheduled like a delivery. Daniel handed her the papers he'd printed, signed, and sealed without ever asking how I felt about any of it. "She's all set," he said briskly. "Her room's ready. Wes, right down this hall." "I'll take it from here," the woman replied, reaching for my suitcase. I held onto the handle for a moment longer, fingers trembling. I didn't want to let go. Not of the suitcase, not of my son, not of the life I had lived for 72 years. But Daniel gave me that awkward half-smile of his, the one that tried to mask guilt with efficiency. "You'll be fine, Mom," he said. "I'll call tomorrow." I wanted to say something, anything, to make him pause. To remind him of the nights I stayed awake nursing his fevers, of the sacrifices I made so he could go to college, of how I skipped meals so he could eat. but the words stuck in my throat. My pride, my love, my heartbreak, all tangled in silence. He hugged me quickly, more out of obligation than affection, and turned to leave. I watched him walk away, shoulders straight, head high, not once looking back. I stood in the doorway until his car disappeared from sight, and only then did I allow the tears to fall. The staff member, whose name I later learned was Grace, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's always hard at first," she said softly. "But you'll adjust. Everyone does." I nodded, unable to speak. Adjust. Another word for surrender. The first night was the hardest. My new room was small but tidy, a single bed, a nightstand, a small TV bolted to the wall. The walls were painted pale yellow, as if color alone could disguise the loneliness it held. Through the thin walls, I could hear the faint hum of televisions, the distant murmur of other residents talking to themselves, and the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum floors. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every tick of the clock reminding me of Daniel's voice. "You're a burden, Mom." I wondered if he believed that, or if he had convinced himself of it to ease his guilt. I wondered if he even realized what those words had done to me. Days turned into weeks. I learned the routines quickly. Breakfast at 7, medication at 8, group games at 10, lunch at noon. The staff was kind but distant. Their smiles mechanical, their compassion rationed like supplies. Most of the residents had the same hollow look in their eyes, a mix of confusion and resignation. Some spoke endlessly about their children. Others never mentioned them at all. I spent my days pretending. Pretending I was adjusting. Pretending I was fine. Pretending I hadn't been abandoned. I sat in the common room, knitting scarves I didn't need, answering the same polite questions from strangers who didn't care to hear the answers. I wrote letters to Daniel that I never sent, each one beginning with, "Dear son," and ending with tears smudging the ink. The first time he visited was 3 weeks later. I heard his voice before I saw him, confident, hurried, full of excuses. Traffic was terrible, he said, though I knew the drive took only 20 minutes. He brought flowers, bright yellow daisies, and placed them on the bedside table as if that would erase the loneliness. "So," he said, glancing around the room. "How's it going? They treating you well here?" I smiled faintly. "Their kind, it's quiet. Peaceful." He nodded, relieved that I wasn't complaining. "Good. That's what matters. You deserve to rest, Mom. You've done enough." "Done enough." Another phrase that meant something different in his language. He stayed 15 minutes, checked his phone twice, hugged me once, then left again with promises of, "Next week." I knew better. That night, I sat by the window watching the lights flicker in the distance. I thought about the home I had left. The garden where I used to plant roses. The kitchen that still smelled faintly of cinnamon. The photo albums collecting dust on the shelves. And I realized that everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, had been reduced to this: a room, rented by the month. A son who called once in a while, and a heart heavy with memories no one cared to remember. But deep inside that sorrow, something else starred. Not anger exactly, but a quiet resolve. I wasn't ready to fade into the background like the others. My life, my worth, wasn't defined by how convenient I was to my son. The next morning, I woke early and took a slow walk down the corridor. I greeted the staff, asked questions, learned names. Grace smiled, surprised by my sudden curiosity. "You're adjusting well," she said. I nodded, but inside I was thinking. Thinking of Daniel. Thinking of the business he had inherited from his father. The one I had helped build from scratch. I had been the one balancing the books, managing payroll, ensuring every cent was accounted for. I knew every corner of that company, every ledger, every name. Daniel had taken over only after I retired, claiming it was time for him to lead, and I had trusted him completely. But now, in this quiet, forgotten place, I began to wonder what he had really done with everything we had worked for. I remembered small things he had mentioned months before. Financial stress, new partners, a few investments. That didn't go as planned. I had brushed it off then, believing he knew what he was doing. Now, doubt crept in. As I sat by the window that afternoon, watching the rain trickle down the glass, I whispered to myself, maybe I am a burden, Daniel. But you'll soon learn what kind of burden I can be. I didn't know how, or when, but I knew I wasn't done yet. He might have thought he'd put me away, hidden me behind the walls of this place. But he had forgotten one thing. Age doesn't erase memory, and silence doesn't mean surrender. For now, I smiled, thanked the nurse who brought my tea, and returned to my knitting. But with each loop of yarn, each soft pull of thread, my mind was weaving something else entirely. A plan. The days in Willow Haven passed slowly, but I had learned to use slowness to my advantage. While the others spent their mornings gossiping, or staring at television screens, I began to observe, carefully, deliberately, every nurse, every resident, every visitor. People talk when they think no one's listening, and old women with shaky hands and tired eyes make the best invisible audience. I wasn't just waiting for time to pass. I was gathering information, connecting dots, and quietly rebuilding a sense of control that Daniel thought he'd taken from me. It started innocently. A staff member, Carol, was helping me with my medication one morning when she mentioned that Daniel had missed a payment. "I'm sure, it's just a mix-up," she said lightly, checking my file. "It happens sometimes, but I knew my son. Daniel didn't make mix-ups when it came to money. He was precise, careful, the kind of man who counted every coin. So if he was late on something as basic as my care fees, that wasn't an accident. It was a sign." That night, I sat awake in my narrow bed, the hum of the hallway lights echoing like static in my ears. Memories flooded back. My husband's old office. The smell of paper and ink, the sound of calculators clicking late into the night. I had handled every account personally back then, every client, every contract. I still remembered the old passwords, the codes, the financial structure we had built together. My mind hadn't aged nearly as much as my body had. I smiled faintly to myself. Daniel thought he'd hidden me away, but he'd forgotten that I knew the bones of the empire he now ruled. A week later, during visiting hours, I asked Grace, the nurse who had first greeted me, if I could use the computer at the reception desk. "Just to check my email," I said sweetly. She hesitated but agreed. It wasn't uncommon for residents to want to message family. What she didn't know was that I had more than family emails in mind. I logged in under my old business address, one Daniel probably assumed I had forgotten. I had left it dormant for years, but all my old records were still linked there. Old cloud drives, archived data, tax forms. And when I began scrolling through the company's public filings, my heart began to pound. Something was wrong. The numbers didn't make sense. Revenue projections were inflated, assets shuffled, and certain consultant fees kept appearing in the books. I recognized the accounting patterns immediately, because they were mine. Daniel had used my old templates, my formats, my structure, but hidden inside them. He'd built a network of fake accounts and shell vendors. He was laundering money through the company, my husband's legacy. I felt my hands shake, not from age, but from fury. He had betrayed more than me. He had stained everything his father and I had worked for. I closed the browser, thanked Grace for letting me use the computer, and returned to my room, the weight of what I'd discovered pressing heavily on my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared out the window, watching the moonlight spill across the courtyard. The wind whispered through the trees, and in the stillness, I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront Daniel with anger or tears. He wouldn't understand either. No, I was going to use the only weapon I had left. My mind. Over the next few weeks, I became a quiet fixture in the nursing home's daily rhythm. I played the part perfectly, the frail, harmless old woman who smiled too easily and asked too few questions. But behind that smile, I was building something. A plan that would require patience, precision, and just enough charm to get people to talk. I started by befriending one of the newer staff members, a young orderly named Jacob. He was kind-hearted, a bit naive, and he loved to chat during his rounds. I learned that his cousin worked at a local law office that occasionally handled corporate documentation for businesses in town. Businesses like mine. I asked casual questions, pretended I was just reminiscing about my working days. He didn't suspect anything when he told me that Carter Holdings had been under quiet review by its board for financial irregularities. So, I hadn't been the only one to notice. That confirmed it. Daniel's greed had begun to show cracks. And cracks meant opportunity. I needed documents, proof, and credibility. A frail old woman's word meant nothing against a successful man's reputation. So I started small. Each time Daniel visited, which became less and less frequent, I'd ask innocent questions. How's business, dear? Still keeping the books balanced? Or, your father would be so proud of you keeping the company afloat. Ah. His eyes would twitch slightly, his voice tighten, just enough to reveal the truth behind his words. He always said the same thing. Everything's fine, Mom. Just fine. But fine men don't fidget. Fine men don't avoid their mother's eyes. During one visit, I asked him to bring me an old file. One I claimed had sentimental value. It was actually a contract copy from his father's last major deal, which had included the original financial codes and ledger templates. Daniel hesitated but eventually brought it. I thanked him sweetly, and after he left, I began comparing that old document to the company's recent filings I'd printed using the Holmes computer. It was all there. The pattern, the falsified numbers, the missing funds. He wasn't just hiding money. He was stealing it from his own employees, redirecting their pension accounts and bonuses into shell corporations. The more I uncovered, the more the betrayal burned through my chest like fire. But I didn't act right away. I waited. I gathered, I organized. I filled pages of notes in my journal. Dates, amounts, account names. Even the names of people he was funneling payments to. My background as an accountant became my armor again, sharpening my purpose with every calculation. Then, one day, fate handed me an opportunity. A new resident arrived, a retired lawyer named Mr. Hansen. He was sharp, cynical, and bored. We met during lunch when I overheard him complaining about how the system chews people up and spits them out. I chuckled and replied, "Only if you let it." His eyes lit up with interest. We started talking regularly after that. Over tea and chess games. I told him my story. Not all of it at first, just enough to pique his curiosity. When I finally revealed what Daniel had done, his expression hardened. "You have evidence?" he asked. "Plenty," I said, showing him my carefully organized notes. He leaned back, whistling softly. "Your son's made some serious mistakes. This could bury him." "That's not my goal," I said quietly. "Not yet. I just want him to understand what he's done. To see me not as a burden, but as the woman who built everything he's standing on." Mr. Hansen smiled. "Then you'll need to play this very carefully." With his help, I drafted a letter addressed to the company's board of directors. Anonymous at first. The letter outlined the irregularities, referenced the specific accounts, and provided enough detail to raise alarms, without naming myself. We mailed it together using the nursing home's outgoing post. The effect was swift. Within 2 weeks, Daniel called me, his voice strained. "Mom, have you talked to anyone about the company?" I feigned confusion. "Why, dear, is something wrong?" He hesitated. No, just, never mind." He hung up abruptly. I smiled to myself. The panic in his voice was confirmation enough. He was scared, but fear wasn't enough. I wanted him to understand the depth of what he'd done. To feel the weight of betrayal that I'd carried for months. I needed to make sure that when his world began to crumble, he'd know exactly whose hands had pulled the first thread. Over the next month, the investigation into Carter Holdings became official. It made the local business news. A minor scandal at first, but one that quickly grew. Mr. Hansen kept me updated through his old contacts in the legal world. Daniel tried to visit twice during that time, but I refused to see him. I told the nurses to say I wasn't feeling well. In truth, I wanted him to stew in uncertainty. He sent flowers, cards, even a handwritten letter, full of apologies and excuses. "You don't understand, Mom. I was just trying to keep the company afloat. I did it for us. For us." The audacity of those words made me laugh. I waited another week before writing him back. My letter was simple. "Dear Daniel, you once told me I was a burden. I suppose, in a way, you were right, but I've decided to return the favor. Love. Mom." I didn't need to sign anything else. He'd know exactly what I meant. A few days later, Mr. Hansen came into the dining room with a grin. "They've suspended him," he whispered. "Pending a full audit." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. I had wanted justice, but what I felt in that moment wasn't triumph. It was release. For the first time since Daniel had left me here, I felt like I could breathe again. Still, I wasn't finished. I gathered all my evidence into a neat folder, labeled it with my late husband's name, and prepared to hand it over to the board directly. They would know who I was soon enough. They would know the truth. But before that, I took one last walk around Willow Haven. I looked at the other residents, their distant eyes, their trembling hands, and I realized something painful yet liberating. We were all burdens, in one way or another, but only because the world had forgotten our worth. I wouldn't let Daniel forget mine. Not ever again. The morning I left Willow Haven, the sky was pale and washed with gold, the kind of light that makes the world look fragile and new. I had woken before dawn, my bag already packed. My heart calm in a way it hadn't been for months. Grace, the nurse who had become my quiet ally, helped me sign the discharge papers. "Are you sure you're ready to go?" she asked gently, concern flickering in her eyes. "Wes," I said with a small smile. "It's time." I walked down the hallway slowly, each step echoing softly against the tile floors. The scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, the same smell that had greeted me on the day I arrived. But now it felt different. Less like confinement, more like closure. The same walls that once felt like a cage now seemed like witnesses to my transformation. I wasn't the frightened old woman who had been dropped off here like unwanted furniture. I was someone new, someone in control again. Mr. Hansen was waiting by the entrance. He tipped his hat when he saw me, his lips curling into a grin. "The board meeting's at 10. I already spoke with my contact. They're expecting you." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the handle of my cane. "Thank you for everything," I told him. He chuckled. "Don't thank me yet. You're about to set off an earthquake." Outside, a cab waited. I took one last look at the building, the pale bricks, the manicured shrubs, the windows reflecting the morning sun. This place had been both my prison and my sanctuary. It had given me time to think, to heal, and to sharpen my resolve. I climbed into the taxi and didn't look back again. The drive to the city was long and quiet. The world outside rolled past in muted colors. Fields, shop, commuters hurrying to work, all part of a life that seemed distant to me now. My reflection in the car window startled me for a moment. The lines on my face were deeper. Yes, but my eyes were alive. For the first time in years, I looked like a woman who knew her own strength. When the taxi stopped in front of Carter Holdings, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The glass tower rose high against the sky, sleek and modern, its logo shining proudly on the facade. My late husband and I had built this company from nothing, starting in a small garage with a single desk and a second-hand computer. We dreamed together, worked late nights, sacrificed everything to make it real. And now, our only son had turned it into a weapon of greed. I stepped into the lobby, the familiar smell of polished marble and fresh coffee washing over me. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes widening slightly. "Mrs. Carter." We weren't expecting. I have an appointment with the board. I interrupted gently. They'll want to see me. Her hesitation lasted only a moment before she nodded and made the call. Within minutes, a tall man in a dark suit appeared, Mr. Langford, one of the senior board members. He had known my husband well and looked both surprised and relieved to see me. Mrs. Carter, he said, shaking my hand warmly. It's been far too long. Please, come with me. The conference room was large and sterile, lined with glass walls that looked out over the city skyline. 7 men and women sat around the long table, murmuring quietly. Their expressions shifted as I entered. First confusion, then curiosity, then a dawning realization. They all knew who I was. I placed the folder I'd brought, my folder, on the table. It was thick, organized, and labeled with dates, accounts, and signatures. Everything you need to know is in here, I said simply. The financial discrepancies, the shell companies, the missing pension funds. I've traced every step. Langford opened the folder, flipping through the pages. The room fell silent. Where did you get all this? Someone finally asked. I built this company, I said, my voice steady. I kept its books long before any of you sat at this table. My son has been bleeding it dry for years. I thought he was doing what was best for the family, but he was doing what was best for himself. A woman at the far end leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, do you realize the implications of this? If this information is accurate, it is, I interrupted, every number, every signature. If you audit the accounts, you'll see I'm right. The tension in the room grew thick. I could feel the weight of their stares, the shifting energy as realization sank in. Langford closed the folder slowly and nodded. We'll act immediately. Good, I said. Because I've spent too many nights watching what my husband built rot from the inside. They promised to investigate, and I knew they would. I left the room with my back straight and my chin high. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt years of resentment lift from my shoulders. Justice wasn't complete yet, but the first stone had been cast. I returned to a small apartment I had rented quietly months before. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a window overlooking the park. But it was mine. No sterile walls, no buzzing lights, no nurses checking in. Just peace and independence. I brewed myself tea and sat by the window, watching the world move on without me. A week later, it happened. The news broke. Carter Holdings CEO, suspended amid financial scandal. The headline was everywhere. On television, in newspapers, on social media. Daniel's photo was plastered across every screen. His once confident smile replaced with shock and exhaustion. He had been summoned for questioning, his accounts frozen, his partners furious. The empire he'd stolen was crumbling piece by piece. I didn't rejoice. Not yet. Instead, I waited. 3 days later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his confidence gone. For a moment, he looked like the little boy I used to know, the one who scraped his knees playing in the yard, and cried when his father scolded him. Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside wordlessly, and he came in. He looked around my apartment, his jaw tightening. You did this, he said finally. I met his gaze. Wes, why? His voice cracked, anger and disbelief bleeding through. Do you have any idea what you've done? They're ruining me, everything I've worked for. Everything you stole, I corrected. You took the company your father and I built with our hands, and turned it into a playground for your greed. You stole from the employees who trusted you, from the legacy that bore your name. You took my trust, my love, and my sacrifice, and you called me a burden. He flinched. I didn't mean it like that, Mom. I was. You meant every word, I interrupted. You meant that I was in your way, that I was an inconvenience, that I reminded you of everything decent you used to be. The silence hung between us. Daniel sank into the chair opposite me, his head in his hands. I didn't want it to go this far, he murmured. I just wanted to keep the business afloat. I thought if I moved the money around, no one would notice. I thought I could fix it before. Before what? I asked sharply. Before you got caught. Before your conscience caught up to you. He looked up, eyes glistening. Before you stopped loving me. For a moment, my heart twisted. Despite everything, he was still my son. But love doesn't erase consequence. It only sharpens it. I never stopped loving you, I said softly. But I stopped trusting you the day you left me in that nursing home. His shoulders sagged, and he let out a shaky breath. What do I do now? Own it, I said. Confess. Make it right. You're still young enough to start over. But only if you stop running from the truth. He nodded slowly, as if the weight of my words were sinking into him one by one. Will you stand by me? I hesitated. I already did. For 72 years. This time, you'll stand on your own. He didn't argue. He just sat there, silent, broken. After a long moment, he stood and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back to me. I'm sorry. Mom, I know, I said quietly. Now go prove it. But when the door closed behind him, I sank into my chair and exhaled deeply. For the first time in a long while, the air felt clean. The burden I had carried, the guilt, the hurt, the disappointment, had lifted. I had given him a real burden to bear, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, a burden of truth. Weeks passed, and the world moved on. The company was restructured, the stolen money recovered. Daniel faced his punishment, not jail, but exile from the empire he had destroyed. He sold his house, moved somewhere quiet. Sometimes he called, not often but enough. His voice sounded different now, humbled, human. I never moved back into Willow Haven. I stayed in my small apartment, planted flowers by the window, and found peace in the rhythm of ordinary days. Some evenings, I walked by the lake where my husband and I used to go, and I'd whisper to the wind, I did it, love. I made it right. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from Daniel. Inside was a simple note, Mom. I started a small business. Nothing big. Honest work. I'm trying to do things right this time. Thank you for teaching me the hardest lesson of my life. I love you. Tears filled my eyes as I folded the letter and set it beside the vase of fresh daisies, the same flowers he had once brought to that Lonerson home. I smiled, realizing that the cycle had come full circle. Maybe he had lost everything, but he had found his soul again, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. As I watched the sun dip low beyond the park, painting the sky in amber and rose, I whispered softly to myself, I was never a burden, Daniel. I was your backbone. You just had to remember. And in that quiet, glowing moment, I finally felt free.